to Playback. What are we doing? This is the EBSN podcast. This is, I think, our third, maybe fourth episode. Not quite so well prepared as the last episodes, but we'll see how it goes this time. So I'm Benjamin J. Heel. I'm the membership officer and website guy with the EBSN, and I've been trying to put together this podcast for a while, which I'll read our blurb from the website. It's an initiative to promote, archive, and make accessible quality content for EBSN members. From interviews to panel discussions, from lectures or keynotes or rare audio material, Playback, the EBSN podcast, seeks to broaden the field of beat studies through insightful, critical, and creative podcasts made available to members through our website. So, today I'm going to give you some news and basic information about the EBSN, what we've been doing, what we've been uploading to the website, and then I'll be interviewing Thomas Antonik, an EBSN member and writer and multi-talented individual from Austria later, and we'll have a nice conversation about various things associated with the beats, mainly focusing on William Burroughs and Ruth Weiss. So some news coming up first. We are actually in the process of putting together a program for our conference, which is coming up in October. So we're going to be doing that over the course of the next couple of weeks, and it's going to be a virtual conference. So EBSN 2021 it's going to be, we've had a really good quality of paper proposals, so I'm really looking forward to that. And that is going to be held the last kind of weekend of October in 2021. So keep an eye on the website for more information about the conference. What else have we got going on? So there's been lots of new content added to the website as well. So we've had a whole bunch of new stuff. One of the most interesting is Phil Baker's review, Just for Jolly, his review of Soft Need number 23, which is this expanded media edition of various cut-up materials and a history of the cut-ups. And it's a really, from looking at the edition, it's a really beautiful kind of artistic piece of work. So it's well worth reading his really fascinating review of this work. Lots of kind of essays and photographs, sort of documenting the history of cut-ups and that period of history. So that's really great. Also, we've got an article by Eric Mortensen about his new introduction to the Turkish edition of Naked Lunch, and an interview with the translator. So that's up on the website now. Also, there's a review by A. Robert Lee of In the Rebel Cafe, which is interviews with what's his name? Ed. Hang on a second, let me find it on the website. Ed Sanders. Yes, of course it's Ed Sanders. Who else am I going to be talking about? Yes, there's a lot of interviews by Ed Sanders. I was actually in the archive in Delaware when Jenny Skirl was there doing her research on that book. So it's really fascinating interview about that collection of interviews there. What else have we got? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. You just need to go and check out the website basically and see the new materials that we put up there. I think there's more stuff to come as well as we go through the rest of this year. Also keep an eye out for the news about the conferences. Talking about conferences, I'll come back and talk about the British Association of American Studies conference that I attended with our guest Thomas. So we'll talk about that in a second. I managed a panel myself at the American Comparative Literature Association virtual conference as well. So there's information and recordings of that session. It was about beat internationalism. So that's well worth checking out as well. Okay, so he's been waiting long enough. So I think I can bring Thomas into this conversation. And I will introduce Thomas first. So let me unmute him. And I will introduce who we've got today. So Thomas Antonik. PhD, beat scholar, poet, filmmaker, musician, and currently leading the research project Transnational Literature, Austria and the Beat Generation at the University of Vienna. In 2013, he was visiting scholar at the FSI Institute at Stanford University. In 2014 and 2015, he was Max Cade Fellow at the Department of German Studies at the University of California at Berkeley. His most recent publications, which I want to talk to him about today, are Among the Nazis, William S. Burroughs in Vienna, 1936-37. That's a bilingual edition on Moloko Press. And also the poetry collection Flickering Cave Paintings of Noxious Nightbirds, and that was out on Ritter in 2017. And he's done various other stuff, various musical projects, which we'll talk about later on in the interview as well. Most interesting of all, and I know that this is something he's working on at the moment, is his biography of Ruth Weiss. So he's working on that right now, and his documentary is finished and I believe going to be doing the rounds of film festivals. So this film, Ruth Weiss, One More Step West is the Sea, actually premiered at the Festival of Austrian Film this year. So welcome, Thomas, to Playback, the EBSN podcast. Woo. Hey, you're welcome. So Thomas, tell me about some of this stuff you've been doing. First of all, I guess tell me, how did you get into beat studies, first of all?
How did I get into beat studies? I studied actually German studies and did a dissertation on the Austrian playwright Wolfgang Bauer, which I finished in 2011. And while working on Bauer, I realized that he was heavily influenced by the beats in the 60s. Bauer was born in 1941 and died in 2005. And so he got famous with a couple of very realistic plays in the late 60s, which just reminded me of the trilogy that Paul Morrissey did with Andy Warhol, like Flash, Trash, and Heat. But then I dug more into that subject and found out that he was actually an admirer of Kerouac and Ginsberg, and the Magic Theater in San Francisco produced a lot of his plays in the 70s. So in 2010, I went to San Francisco for the first time to have a look at the Magic Theater archives there, which are housed at the UC Berkeley Bancroft Library. And then I just started to, have a look at other Austrian and German-speaking authors and poets to find out if I have overseen that big influence on like other authors like Friedrich Jelinek and Peter Handke, the recent two Nobel Prize winners. And then of course Ernst Jandl, the Austrian sound poet, had a performance with Allen Ginsberg and other beats at the famous Royal Albert Hall poetry reading in 1965. And I read Burroughs and Kerouac and Ginsberg already when I was like 15, 16, 17. And actually, while studying German literature, I pretty much forgot about all that. And then I saw that connection that I can do with my academic research. So it was quite exciting, kind of a satori, you want to call it like that, that I could combine these two things and start doing research on the transnational connections between the Beat Generation and Austrian literature.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think a lot of beat scholars have this same sort of relationship. We sort of may have read it in our youth, may have come across Burroughs or Kerouac when we're kind of younger teenagers. There's this whole like gap year travel, or this sort of coming of age period that you get handed a copy. It's like, I remember at college I was handed a copy of Naked Lunch, and it's like, man, check this out, it's got all these drug references in the back, you got to check this out. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll do this. And this is when I was studying science. I had no interest in studying literature at that time at all, and it kind of turned me on to it in some way, but I didn't really come back to it seriously until a lot later. So it sounds like you had a kind of similar path that you sort of maybe. I mean, did you regard it as serious literature when you first came across the Beats, or was it more like pop culture than literature?
I think although you learn that in school and also university, that there is some kind of distinguishing between pop culture and serious literature, I think I never made such distinctions. So when I was like reading on the road at the age of 16, and it was kind of something I have never seen and read before in the so-called serious literature I was interested in. So that was kind of an eye-opener too. I'm not sure about. I think the next thing I read, because I was fascinated by this old bull Lee figure in On the Road, was actually Naked Lunch, and I don't know how it is for you as a native speaker, but for me it was extremely difficult to understand what Burroughs is talking about in my first attempt of trying to read this book. So that was actually apart from the themes that are in there, like the drugs you mentioned and all that stuff. I consider that as like very serious literature. Yeah,
I agree. It's really strange again, because the friend who passed it to me was not someone I would have classed as a serious sort of scholarly student. He was a dropout. So read Naked Lunch, and I'm like, okay, I'll have a look at this, and I tried. And then, I don't know if other people have had this same experience, but it's just like, I just found it so profoundly challenging. And it was something that I had to beat. It was like, why don't I understand? Why don't I get what's going on here?
Big thing, actually, yeah. For me, it's like many people are maybe not like that, but for me, it's like, if I don't understand something, then I have to really dig into that then.
Yeah, I mean that's what Oliver Harris sort of alludes to that idea in his book, The Secret of Fascination, I think. So yeah, I think a lot of us have come to that angle. Okay, so that's interesting how you got into the Beats, and it's interesting that you have it from not being a native speaker of English, but still having that same experience. Which I guess brings us to your interest in Ruth Weiss and this transnational connection between sort of Austria and the Beats. So tell me a bit more about how you ended up sort of researching and developing this interest in Ruth Weiss. That started pretty much as a very soon after I started this whole research project thing. Because, of course, you want to know if there is something also has already been written on that subject. And I think at the time the only academic essay that was there was from Jaap van der Bent about the Vienna group, and their connections to the Beats in that book, Transnational Beat Literature. But the first thing you do is like you go on Google and look for like Beat Generation Austria or something like that. And I guess one of the first things that popped up was the name Ruth Weiss, and I have to say I have never heard of her before.
And turns out there is a beat poet living in California who grew up in Vienna and had to escape the Nazis in 1938 and is still out there. So the next thing was that I found out that the Viennese publisher Edition Exil has published 4 books of her, bilingual editions. So her original poetry and translations of hers. So I got in touch with that publisher, and Christa Stippinger, the head of that company, told me coincidentally Ruth Weiss is coming to Vienna in 3 weeks, so I could meet her for an interview. And I was delighted to meet her and did that first interview, which was actually published on the EBSN website.
Which I did the proofreading on as well. I seem to remember.
So that was very fascinating to hear about her life, and she was very friendly and open towards people who were interested in what she's doing. Also because of the fact that she was not acknowledged until she was about 70 years old, so she really appreciated, like, if anyone was doing some research and writing about her poetry and her life. So it took 1 year, and she came back for the last time, because after that she was 85 at that time and didn't want to fly anymore. And we had another interview, and in 2014 I got that 12 months fellowship at the UC Berkeley, so I was there for 12 months. And of course I got in touch with her and visited her, and we met several times during that stay, and I had a look at her archives. Her papers were already there, part of it, at the UC Berkeley. So one thing led to the other, and then I think it took like maybe 1 more year, and I decided to turn this whole thing into a biography project about her.
Oh, that's great. I mean, Weiss for me, she stands out, and she really sort of forms this sort of. She's just such a sort of central figure, and she's central but like invisible at the same time. It's this, she sort of crosses that boundary in terms of beat studies with like being on that edge in terms of her transnational identity. She's sort of between nations always, but also as a female beat who's been such a profound influence on figures like Kerouac, and was this, was there before the beats, essentially, right? She was doing the poetry before the beats, and she's kind of just really sort of slipped through the gaps and been forgotten. I mean, even I've got one of the collections of female beat writers. And that collection has only got like a couple of selections from Weiss. She's kind of like on the periphery, even among the female beats. It's really
not even that. Like sometimes when there is a chapter about female beats writers or poets, like she's ignored.
Yeah.
More recent publications.
Yeah. So I mean, why do you think that is? Why would she be ignored?
I think even if there are these famous publications like Brandon Knight's Women of the Beat Generation, in which she's portrayed, she's really by many people not really recognized as a beats poet because maybe of her style. I mean, there is this book by Preston Whaley from 2004, I think, Blows Like the Horn, in which he's describing her style and is writing that like her poetry is very abstract, which is, by the way, only true for a part of her poetry, and doesn't associate her writing with beat poetry. And it's more like a biography that connects her to the beats, and maybe that's a reason for some scholars to leave her out or only I mentioned her at the margins, or maybe they are just not really familiar with her works.
Yeah, is that because she doesn't fit that more familiar narrative of female beat writers in some way, sort of writing memoir type works, or sort of?
Yeah, because many female beat writers were also relationship-wise connected to the male beats, like being girlfriends or wives or whatever. And a lot of them also were writing mainly about their relationships to, I don't know, Carrick and Cassidy and all these guys. Think of Brenda Fraser, Troya, and Hetty Jones. The books that get most interest of them are when they are writing about their relationships to their husbands.
Yeah, which is, which is, shall we say, uncomfortable, shall we say? And again, it's uncomfortable in a way as we're two white male writers talking about female beats in this way. It sort of feels a little bit wrong and a little uncomfortable in some way. But at least we're talking about it, At least we're not kind of whitewashing it and pushing it under the carpet. I mean, I have an interest in Vice, I guess, because I share a great love of the reason why she dyed her hair green, right? So she dyes her hair green because she watched Joseph Losey's 1946 movie. I think it's 1946 or 48. Yeah, the movie The Boy with Green Hair, right? Which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I'll explain this movie. So it's kind of a kids movie, but it stars as a child actor Dean Stockwell, who is famous for what was he? What's he most famous for? Perhaps the role of Frank in Blue Velvet, maybe, or on a pop cultural level, he was Al in Quantum Leap. For those of you who remember 80s American TV show, but But Joseph Losey, I mean, I've been watching sort of some of his movies recently. He's a fascinating character as well in terms of his relationship with Hollywood and what that film stands for. It's an anti-war film, but also from a slightly socialist perspective, given that he was at that point a member of the Communist Party of America and ended up. Yeah, exactly, and ended up, poor guy got blacklisted and had to make his movies in the UK of all places. So so again, these sort of patterns and these sort of transnational connections seem to keep going on. So you're working on this biography, but you've also done this film. So can you tell me a bit more about the movie documentary that you've made on Vice?
Yeah. Well, I think it was in short after I started this biography project, and I was at a conference where I met a friend of mine who is a film scholar at the University of Colorado, Robert Dasanovsky, and I told him about this project, and he said, if you go back there to California and visit Ruth Weiss, please take a camera with you and film the interviews you are doing with her, because that could be of value, and maybe you can even make a film out of that. And I thought, that's a good idea, maybe. So in my music career, I did a couple of lo-fi music videos and stuff like that, and a lot of short experimental films. So I knew a little bit of how it works, but I had no idea how to make really a good, high quality film, not cutting wise, but technically. I didn't know what I need to the whole equipment, what to do to go there and then film it in a manner that you can also show it in a movie theater. So I got a Estonian filmmaker on board who I coincidentally met at the Biennale Film Festival, and she helped me developing the whole concept of this film and told me what I need. what kind of camera, audio recording and light stuff and all that. And this was a big help. And then I was confident enough to start doing it, and I didn't know what will come out of it. But so from I think spring 2017 until winter 2019, I think I went like 4 or 5 times to California to film with Ruth, also film performances of hers and interview other people who are connected to her. And I filmed a lot of places that were important for her, like San Francisco and the Redwoods in California, and also New Orleans. And then at some point I started editing this stuff.
Well, because Vice was a filmmaker too, right? She made some of her own films.
Yeah. That's correct. She made one film actually, The Brink, in 1961, which is a 41-minute black and white 60mm film that is quite an underground classic by now.
Yeah.
It was preserved by the Pacific Film Archive in 2019.
It is great. I mean, the film reflects a lot of her poetic sensibilities. As you say, it's an underground film, and it's a classic, really. But again, another forgotten classic of the underground again. But I thought, because I've been watching the documentary, so thank you for sending me the link so I could check it out before it comes out, and it really does capture aspects of Vice's like visual poetic language from The Brink, I feel, and I really love that. I love that it's not like a traditional sort of documentary, like, well, this is Vice, this is where she comes from, this is this is
I really wanted to avoid that, because it's very boring to do that for me.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not a biographical documentary, but it captures, as you say, it captures a visual poetry of what you were experiencing when you were connecting with her in those contexts. I mean, it's so fascinating. Tell me about her house. Where is she living there?
Oh, she lived in Albion, which is a small village on Highway number 1, maybe 3.5 hours north of San Francisco, in the Redwoods, so like 2 miles off the Pacific coast. And
I mean, it looks like she's living in the middle of the woods there, right?
Yes, which was really the case. I mean, Albion is, you cannot call it a village, because I mean the center of this whole thing is like one little square where there is a grocery store and a post office. That's it. So and around that are like in the woods hidden a lot of like houses like that. And if she wouldn't tell you where she lives, you would never find this place. Actually, wow. Like, it's really secluded and hidden.
Oh, it sounds magical, and it looks magical, and you make it. The film gives it a sense of kind of magic and a sense of wonder. I mean, she even talks about that in the film as well. It's like, what an amazing place.
It was also magical for her to find that place, because she was living in San Francisco until '82, and coming back from a long trip from Mexico, I think it was like 4 or 5 months, with her then partner Paul Blake, and they came back to their apartment where they lived for 12 years, and the landlord told them they had to leave because he needed that space for something else, and I think for his son. So Ruth at that point said maybe it's just time to leave the city, and then they wanted to find something outside, and a friend of hers were already living up there somewhere, and knew that this house was for sale. And I think it took maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then her mother died, and her father died like half a year before her mother. they had a house in Turlock in the Central Valley where she never wanted to go. She hated the place, like, because of all this toxic stuff that's going on there with like spraying their vegetables and fruits. So she sold that house and found the other one, and I think she didn't even see the money. So like within 1 weekend, she sold one house and bought the other, and that was the place where she stayed until her passing yesterday.
Oh, amazing! So, what's happening with the film? Are you're taking it around to festivals at the moment, or what? I mean, I guess COVID is having having its effect on that as well, I suppose.
Absolutely, we were lucky that we could have a real movie theater premiere in June in Austria. And we don't know what's going on in fall, if such festivals will be possible to be make it physical in movie theaters, or if there's just a streaming. But the next festival will be in Munich in September, and there is a lot more coming up, but I'm not officially allowed to talk about it.
Okay, I'll stop you there. Well, we can talk about the De Gruyter essay collection that you did together. I must put a shout out to Estibilitz Encarnacion, whose full Spanish name I can't pronounce properly, but Encarnacion Pinado, who took over the podcast from me last time and did a really great job on doing that with Nancy Grace. So I got to thank you Estibilitz, and you've also with Thomas put together this book. So tell me a bit about this essay collection, Thomas.
I have to say that Estibilitz also did a very important work on Ruth Weiss, and included her in her dissertation that came out in 2016. And through the EBSN, of course, and through Bob Lee, who knew that I'm working on Weiss, and Estibilitz worked in her dissertation about her. He brought us together and suggested that we should make this essay collection. And so I think we started in 2018 maybe with that thing, and invited a couple of people to write on different subjects of Ruth Weiss's works, because the thing is that she wasn't only a poet, and we already mentioned she was a filmmaker, and she invented jazz and poetry in 1949, and performed with many jazz musicians over 7 decades, and she painted also. So we wanted to have all these things covered, and invited 12 scholars to write essays about her works, and it was important to write about her works and not about her bio. And then we also had the idea to make it more like a tribute and homage to her, and also invited 15, 16 poets and colleagues of hers to contribute poetry. So we have also poems in there by, for example, Anne Waldman and Eddie Winans, Jack Hirschman. So it was quite some work, but it turned out pretty well, and will come out in I think early September is another publication date.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, edited collections are always a tricky proposition. So you guys have done a really great job to get that together and to get it coming out. So I really look forward to seeing that. I must play a clip. Actually, I'm going to play the trailer for your documentary here, so we can have a little rest your voice, take a sip of water, and we'll come back in a second after this. So this is the trailer from One More Step West is the Sea.
Hey, beast! Oh, beast, be a saint. It's time for transformation.
Please leave your message, your name, and your phone number clearly. Thank you.
I gave up fucking open prairie and a rifle and a grub stake to play a hollow log with a beatnik.
The Hanged Man, a tarot, miracle of easy bed, upside down. I didn't follow any rules. I didn't know how to make a film. I just went and made a film. And I love to improvise. When I perform, I improvise. You can only smoke indoors. We don't want you to smoke outside. Good.
So we were there in the San Francisco art community, the Beat Generation, as it's called. And she's the one, I think, the first person to do poetry and jazz.
You with sax and flute, your notes on wings of jazz, at the point of 7 decades, sitting zazen. And then came Kristallnacht. My father was one of the people picked up. Well, miraculously, they released him, and he said, pack immediately. We're going to try and get to Switzerland. It is not fate, but a magnet drawing one to its destination, a door waiting to be opened without hesitation. Okay, I'm gonna get a beer.
Okay, yes, so that was the trailer from One More Step West is the Sea, and I find it, like, again, it's a striking film, striking sounding documentary as well, really capturing Vice in her element, I think. And it's also, just listening to that, it's just so striking to me about how important and how culturally pervasive that idea of jazz poetry and poetry backed by jazz music is in American culture. I mean, it was parodied endlessly across, TV shows through the 50s, 60s, 70s. And she just gets no recognition for that at all. It's so strange.
Yeah, none. Well, yeah. I wrote about that now several times, and I can repeat that story, how that developed, if you want to. So she was doing it in 1949 in Chicago, where she lived at the age of 21, where she actually was asked to read her poetry on the stage, and there was a jazz combo getting prepared for their jam session after her, but the saxophone player just started to play with her, reacting to her voice, and then at some point the drummer also started with that, and that was actually the beginning of jazz and poetry. And in 1950 she went to New Orleans and landed in a place called 912 Toulouse, where a couple of artists and musicians lived. So she got connected there and told those people what she did in Chicago, so they already did it also there. And in 1952, finally, she hitchhiked from New Orleans to San Francisco, where she lived for the next 30 years. And she didn't do her jazz and poetry there immediately, but after, I think, 3 years, she suddenly was walking on the street and recognized a man walking towards her that she recognized from New Orleans, and it was the piano player Johnny Elgin. So they got connected, and 2 other friends were living in San Francisco also by now, and so they started doing the thing also in San Francisco, and then two of those musicians opened the jazz club The Cellar in 1956, where Ruth started as a waitress and started also this jazz and poetry every Wednesday. And yeah, you had a lot of other colleagues like Ferlinghetti and Rexroth in the audience. I don't know if Carrick was there, by the way, but when they met, I'm sure she told him about this whole stuff. And in 1957, then she finally moved out of the city for half a year. And in that time, others started doing copying this kind of performance. Among them, Ferlinghetti and Kenneth Rexroth, who were so smart to also produce a record, which is that famous first jazz and poetry record. And there are these liner notes by Ralph Gleason, who describes it as if Rexroth and Ferlinghetti were the ones who innovated this whole thing, and whose voice is not mentioned in one single line.
No, and of course Ferlinghetti sort of never published a book of Weiss's poetry as part of the Pocket series either, right?
Yeah, that's also one thing that she finished her first book manuscript Steps in 1958 and went to Ferlinghetti with that, and he rejected it with the explanation that first it's not political enough, and second is she's a woman and they don't publish women. And
of course they published Joanne Kiger and various other women later on.
Yeah, but I think that was a couple of years later. Yeah. So that was in the 60s.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So.
But yeah, I know that Philip Lamantia was good friends with her, and he tried to bring her into our hand press, and they also rejected it on the same with the same reason.
So strange. That book is fantastic. I love that book, but yeah, it's so strange that they overlooked it. Yeah. Okay. So I think you sent me a few sound files as well, and there's one I wanted us to play as well. I'm not sure exactly how long this is, but there's one on Ruth Weiss writing haiku with Jack Kerouac. So I'm gonna play you this sound.
Oh, that's just a very short.
Yeah. Okay, let's play that one.
I don't know if you know, actually, Jack Kerouac and I used to meet and write haiku through the night. I was never one of his girlfriends. That's why he treated me well. But he would come by about, 2, 3 in the morning. I was living in a place called the Wentley Hotel in San Francisco on Polk and Sutter. And he'd come by, bring his Dago red, as he called it, and I always had beer. And we'd sit down and write all these haiku. I wish I had them. I'd be a millionaire today. But anyway.
So kind of such a shame, and so sort of like, this regret of not having this connection. But it feels to me, and I think I've written this or said this somewhere else, that Kerouac was not a great champion of his friend's work, in the way that like Ginsberg was endlessly kind of badgering publishers, saying publish this, publish that by this, but Kerouac never really did that, and so it feels like Weiss missed out for various reasons. But again, she's not the only female writer figure.
As I just mentioned, Lamantia tried to help her with getting published, but also he wasn't very successful in that.
Okay, so and tell me how's the biography going? So you're working on the biography of Weiss at the moment, and how's that coming on?
It's coming on very well, surprisingly well. I'm just right in the middle of that, and it's a very interesting to do this piece of work, because I have a lot. I did maybe like 40 hours of interviews with Ruth between 2015 and 2019, and it's very interesting to have like her repeating certain things, like meeting Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy and how it was, and having the same story, like with slight variations, like 3 or 4 times, and then you read somewhere else and she's telling a totally different story. And putting these pieces together is very, very exciting for me.
Yeah,
the detective work.
Well, that's it. Well, the past is a foreign country, right? It's something that is it always has to be pieced together again, and you have to put yourself into that picture as well, right? You're the interpreter of this evidence, as it were. So that's really fascinating. I really look forward to seeing it.
Also because she talked about that whole beat area, like the 50s, before this book Women of the Beat Generation came out, because like nobody was actually interested in did that connection, because she was, as I said, like from the early 80s on, she didn't even live in San Francisco anymore. She lived in a small village. Did occasionally jazz and poetry up there, but there was not really anybody who made that connection until I think it was even 3 years before Women of the Beat Generation that Herb Caen from the San Francisco Chronicle suddenly called her the goddess of the Beat Generation in his column, which suddenly was a surprise and also raised some attention.
Yeah, it's so important to kind of to bring this back. I always feel as beat scholars we're caught in this bind between the big three, Burroughs, Ginsberg, Kerouac, and this idea of spreading out beyond that to female beats, to black beats, then to transnational beatdom as well, where it feels like there's this exchange between the two things. No, it's an American phenomenon. No, it's just about the main beats, and then trying to pull it out and see it as a wider movement, and always kind of fighting between those two patterns. So that
actually, you should probably, when it comes, for example, to jazz and poetry, you would have to put Rob Weiss into the center, and like around that is then Kerouac and.
Well, totally. I mean, I've been teaching Howl, and it's totally clear how important jazz is. Underlying the intonations and the rhythms of how it's jazz, and it's right there. So it's so important. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on a little bit from Weiss, and let's talk a bit about your other book. You did a book on Burroughs and Vienna, right? Burroughs' year in Vienna, right? 1936 to 37. So can you tell me a little bit about that, where that came from, and how that came to be published?
Well, the book is actually an accident.
There are no accidents in the magical universe.
That's true. Well, the thing is that how do I start this?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to play a clip. This is from Howard Bruckner's documentary on Burroughs. Burroughs, the movie. Okay, I'm just going to play a bit. So we have Burroughs. Okay. I'll play it through. Sorry.
Yes, well, I don't, it just won't work, that's all. Can't get there. Now, if you can, certainly only as a spectator.
At 15, I was sent to Los Alamos Ranch School for my health.
where they later made the atom bomb. It seemed so right somehow, like the school song, far away and high on the mesa's crest, here's the life that all of us love the best. Far away and high on the mesa's crest, I was forced to become a Boy Scout, exercise before breakfast, and ride a stubborn, spiteful, recalcitrant horse. I formed a romantic attachment for one of the boys at Los Alamos and kept a diary of this affair that was to put me off riding for many years. I persuaded my family to let me remain in St. Louis, so my things were packed and sent to me from the school. And I used to turn cold, thinking maybe the boys are reading it aloud to each other. When the box finally arrived, I pried it open and threw everything out until I found the diary and destroyed it forthwith, without even a glance at those appalling pages. This still happens from time to time. I will write something I think is good at the time, and looking at it later, I say, my God, tear it into very small pieces and throw it into somebody else's garbage can.
After graduating from Harvard, I studied medicine in Vienna for about 6 months when the war broke out in 1942. I was in the Army for about 6 months, discharged. In 1944, I met Jack Kerouac, Joan Vollmer, Allen Ginsberg, and also
okay, so I'm going to stop
Herbert
it there.
Huncke.
So this, I think, he was reading this out in the documentary, and I think this is from a fragment, an autobiographical fragment he was working on that either maybe has been published as part of the Adding Machine essays, or I think it was going to be published, but still hasn't seen the light of day. But it's just really fascinating to me how he kind of brushes over the period in Vienna. He's focused on the scouts and
so do all his biographers.
Yeah, precisely. And it just seems to me such a sort of really profoundly important year in his life, you know. And again, in this fragment, he's talking about, almost like in an ashamed way, talking about his homosexuality. And I wonder if that has something to do with it. But again, Thomas, tell me more about your book and your research and this magic accident.
Yeah, well, of course, Boros and Vienna was conceptualized as a starting point of my whole research project, because that's like in the 30s and more or less the second early connection between the Beats and Austria, next to like Ruth Weiss growing up at the same time being in Vienna. And when I co-organized that EBSN conference in 2018, I wanted to invite Barry Miles to talk about Boros and Vienna, because even in his 700 pages biography, it's like about 4 pages that covers like almost a year in Boros' life. It was surprising, so I just wanted to invite him and have a conversation, probably with him and Oliver and myself on stage. And unfortunately, Barry had to cancel. So I thought, I'm giving a paper about that on my own, and started to do a little more research, and it got more and more and more and more. So it was already, I think, 30 minutes lecture, because it gathered so much material that 20 minutes weren't enough. And coincidentally, Ralf Riel from Moloko, the publisher in Germany, was at the conference and asked me if I would like to do something with that paper and make a publication at his press. And I thought, of course, the paper is not enough. And then I the research went on, and so I think after a year I had this book together.
So Ralph Friel, he's the owner of, is it Moloko Plus Recording? So it's a record label and a press and an imprint.
Yes, right? Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's very cool. I mean, he published the recent editions of Burroughs' Minutes to Go, Exterminator, and the new book, Battle Instructions. They really are great editions. They're very beautiful. So and the record label is very cool as well. So yeah, big shout out to Ralph and his great work on that. Am I right in thinking that the material in Barry Miles' biography, a lot of that comes from the Ted Morgan tapes that are in Arizona State University, right? Okay.
Well, most of it actually, yeah. Some of it is only on the tapes, but most of it is already also in the Ted Morgan biography. Yeah.
Yeah. So
then you have a couple of other interviews. For example, in that book from Victor Bockris.
Yeah, in the bunker, the interviews.
And I think Miles also did research in Vienna a little bit, but for example, I was interested in we know from the biographies that Burroughs studied medicine in Vienna, but nobody says anything about who were actually those people who were teaching there at that time. So I just went into that university archive here and found Burroughs' documents that are archived at the university, and there you have them all listed, and they are all high-ranked Nazis. So.
This is the foundations for the Dr. Benway character, right? Which is
exactly, and it's even clear if you're the head of the medicine department back then was Dr. Bernkopf. So Bernkopf, Benway, that's not far away, and then you just have to add one and one together, and where all these crazy doctors in Naked Lunch and other books are coming from, actually.
Yeah,
what he witnessed here must have been pretty amazing. I have read a couple of interviews with before Jewish professors got kicked out of the university, and when they still were students of medicine, what was going on actually there between Nazis who were then not officially Nazis because the Nazi party was still forbidden, and Jewish and leftist students, they were fighting at the university, really brutally against each other and things like that. I doubted that Burroughs didn't witness such a thing, and
and it sounds like a scene straight out of Naked Lunch, right? It sounds like it's
or think about the Cities of the Red Night, where all these doctors are debating about the virus B23. It's you can imagine that Burroughs saw something like that, maybe with a different content, but something similar in Vienna.
Yeah, it's just fascinating, but endlessly fascinating. All these links with Burroughs and his history and where this comes from. All this, the biographical materials. So the book. When did the book come out? Was it last year or? I'm trying to remember.
Last year I think it was May or June.
Okay, so that's available from, I think it's the Sea Urchins website.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Sea Urchin editions. So yeah, okay. I'll put links to this on the podcast description as well. So there'll be links to all of this material that we've been discussing here. So, okay, well I think that's we can start to talk about your creative impulses, Thomas. You mentioned you did music stuff in the past, so you've sent me some music and sound files, of which I find quite fascinating. I mean, we mentioned Ralph Friel and his label, and I was trying to think about Austrian sound noise artists and underground artists that I'm interested in, and I thought of Fenez. And the label, Mego Editions. You know this?
I'm familiar with that, but yeah, Fenez is very interesting.
Yeah, I think most of his material came out on this label, which is associated with various underground musicians. So I want to play a clip of a track from Fen O'Berg, which is a collaboration between Fenez, Jim O'Rourke, and the owner of Mego Records. So I'll just play that now. So that's Fen O'Berg from, it's the Fen O'Berg theme from the Magic Sound of Fen O'Berg. We've been talking about Magic Universe and various other cut-ups and connections with jazz and music, and this is like a trio, three musicians using laptops and cutting up. I think that's John Barry's, one of John Barry's themes from James Bond's Moonraker movie. so it's all kinds of things going on there, sampling and glitch and various kinds of experimentation. But that piece kind of struck me as an extension of, or an example of, some of these techniques we've been talking about with Burroughs and with Weiss, and what's being done with them now. And I was taken with your piece that has some similarities with that. Your collaboration with Michael Fisher. You want to tell me a bit about that?
Well, Michael is a improvisation artist, mainly saxophone, and he developed something that's called the feedback saxophone. We heard a performance of his at the EBSN in 2018 on last evening.
I remember that very clearly now. It was fantastic. Yes, I do remember.
He also founded the Vienna Improvisers Orchestra in 2005, which is basically a coming together of from I would say 10 to up to 30, 40 musicians that he's more or less like curating. They're coming on stage and he's like conducting them, but there is no rehearsal, there is no piece written that they are playing. It's all ad hoc, so they all play that spontaneously and following his directions. And he's making a third thing where he's collaborating with poets, including me, where he's having a bunch of field recordings and found footage and also audio tracks by other musicians, and he's mixing them together on 3 CD players and also doing this spontaneously, and at the same time the poet is starting to read. But the important thing is that there's nothing like picked beforehand. Like you choose what you're going to read in the moment, and you're listening to him and listening to the atmosphere and see what fits, and then you're reading from the material you brought. And then he's listening to what you're reading and is reacting to that, so maybe changing the sounds to what fits better, or also maybe to make some like counterpoint. And this is something like that is fascinately like going. It's becoming like one thing and going up. Like if you do a performance of like 1 or 1.5 hours like this.
That's completely fascinating to me, because what you're talking about is a kind of controlled sort of spontaneous improvisation, right? You've got pieces, but I
even did spontaneous cut-ups on stage. So I just brought my stuff, but I also brought scissors, and then I just cut my whole poetry and shuffled it, and then I just started reading what's coming out there. And it was great how it fit to his sounds.
It's so interesting. I mean, because you've been in a band as well, and that's what happens when you're doing kind of free improvisation within a band context. There you start to pick up this weird kind of telepathy that goes on between the band. You pick
it's something scientists call interbrain synchronicity.
So that's a fascinating project. Well, let's hear some of it. So this is the Flickering Cave Sounds excerpt, Thomas Antonik and Michael Fisher. So let's play a bit of it.
Schießt ins Hirn und stirbt dort. Spermaceti aus dem Kopf eines Wals. Am Gully, im Asphalt, durch den du ein Licht wirfst. Die Wirklichkeit ist ohne Zukunft, ohne Augen, ohne Ohren. Und du würdest gerne die Bombe zünden. Schwarzen Sternenstaub auf deinen Füßen finden. Alas, die schwarze Bombe namens Blackie musst du den Status Quo kennen. Ihn mit schwarzem Schweiß bedecken. habe ich gelitten. Und Nachhängen, die Rückkehr in die gute, alte, alles, was ich sagen kann, vom Himmel auf futuristisch erwarten. Dass Ideale gerendert werden. Ja, es wird dunkler, dank der Roadmaps. Dunkle Zeitalter der Paranoia sind Bluthunde nicht zu fassen. So soll es sein. Hinuntergespült. Wir leben im Augenblick. Und warum bist du noch immer in diesem Land? Wir verlieren und Tony, sieh nur hin. Alle sehen deinen frostigen Schädel. Wenn dir diese negativen Gedanken in den Füßen stecken, wurde dein Geiststaun gestern zu einer Konzerthalle. Hör gefälligst zu, wenn ich den Teufel im Tarot ziehe, bedeutet das Krieg. Gott ist das wahrhaftig Böse. Sofa, wir können uns zurücklehnen, selbst in einer neuen Kunstform, bei der es darum geht, Kerzen, Geliebte, oh bitte, oh Ursache, es wird kälter und kälter und wir haben Waffen. Die Waffen eines Sprachlosen, der das Bewusstsein.
You know, that reminds me in places, I mean, there's a lot of sort of industrial elements to that and a bit of Einstein's Neubauten as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the heavier sound that he's using. Like a lot of it is also like ambient wise. As I said, found footage also is like sounds in nature. You can hear a lot of what he's using. String quartets, stuff like that. But this one was actually, by the way, a live cover. What I did.
Yeah, I could hear the sort of the live ambience there. So yeah, I mean, so that was completely sort of spontaneous, improvised.
I didn't know what I will going to read in the next second. That was very fascinating.
Fantastic.
This track will also appeared recently on a compilation by Moloko.
Oh, that came out on Moloko as well.
Yeah, the CD is called "Being on the Beat." Featuring Jürgen Bloch, also Williams Boros. There are 23 tracks on that.
That's great. I'll put a link on the description so that people can check that out. So also at the Vienna conference, your band William S. Burroughs Hertz played a set which slightly traumatized my daughter, if I remember rightly. No, take more than that to traumatize her, I tell you. So I'm gonna play a track from that band, and then you can tell us about it. So I think I'm gonna go with Jesus Christ Porno Star, one of the least offensive.
Well, not only traumatize your daughter.
The least offensive.
Blamed for blasphemy because of that.
Really? Well, it's got to go on the podcast then. Let's go for it.
The star is born, lighting at the end of the Christmas tree. I'm a porn star, my name is Jesus. You can watch me on TV. Jesus Christ.
Fantastic. So where did the idea for William S. Burroughs Hertz come from, and what is this band all about?
Well, the first thing I have to say is it doesn't have a lot to do with William S. Burroughs. It's really also one of these like non-coincidental coincidences. But I met Jane Ratia, who is the singer, like with me. So we are both singing in the band. I met him in I think 2008 in Finland. He's actually a painter. and we connected like from the start very well, and decided to do something creatively together. And at some point started to write a novel also that was published in 2012 in only German so far. So we wrote it in English, but I translated it, and that came out in 2014. But anyway, I was visiting Janne one summer, I think it was 2009, and he said we should form a band. And I was not really taking it serious, because like he's living in Finland, I'm living in Austria, so how do you form a band with this? And then he said, well, he will come to Vienna to record an album. And I said, like, yeah, but we don't have any songs that we can like rehearse before that or something like that. And he said, no, we would all do it spontaneously. So I invited two musician friends in Vienna to come to my place, and we set up a recording studio actually in the living room with my piano, and there was drums and bass and guitar, and Janne came, I think, for 5 days, and I said before that, I said jokingly, so maybe let's just do one improvisation piece, and that lasts for like 1 hour, and we put that on an album, and that's it. And he said then, no, I'm sure we are so good that we should actually record 50 songs, and the whole album would be 15 minutes. Okay, so so he came to Vienna, and
you just reminded me of Orthrealms. There's an Orthrealm album with like 99 like less than a minute songs on it, right?
So I think that was the original idea. But he came to Vienna with a bunch of lyrics, and then we also like wrote spontaneous in the kitchen, like whenever some. It was really a creative excess, like very excessive. Like we were getting up in the morning, turning on all devices, and I grabbed some lyrics that he had written after I went to bed, and sat down at the piano, looked what could fit, and like after 10 minutes there was a song ready. We did 1 or 2 takes per song, and after 5 days we really had an album, or at least we had 50 songs recorded. And then it took maybe 1 year, and we found the perfect technician, sound engineer for mixing and mastering this whole thing, which is Kramer in Florida, who did an extremely well job and also liked the whole stuff what we were doing a lot. And
Kramer, is he the guy? Didn't he do work with Smashing Pumpkins? Am I thinking of? Is this the same?
I'm not sure about
Kramer?
Smashing Pumpkins. He was a live engineer, sound engineer for Sonic Youth and a lot of other bands.
Yeah.
And Ween.
Yeah. Yeah,
Butthole Surfer.
That's who I'm thinking of. Oh yeah. He played bass for the Butthole Surfers. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
I think his own most well-known band is Bongwater.
Yeah, of course.
From 80s, early 90s. So he mixed and mastered this album, and ever since is at least mastering every album we are doing. And it was great fun doing this. And so, but Janne is still in Finland and I'm still in Austria. So what we're doing is we're meeting maybe once a year to organize some gigs and play, and also try to at the same time try to record as much as possible.
Yeah, I find those kind of having conceptual restrictions in some way on a project is actually really helpful sometimes. I did a project called Midnight Moth where we basically we recorded the whole album in a kind of similar way, just entirely improvised or using bits and pieces that we've recorded in the past, just random pieces, and put it together and record, mix everything in the space of a whole weekend, like with no sleep, just work all the way through, and then that's it. It's done. And
the only difficult thing that if you want to play these songs live, then after 1 year or so, like it's sometimes very hard to reconstruct this actually. And also, if you're doing overdubs, you have to figure something out how to.
Well, I mean, it's impossible. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? It's impossible to recapture that thing. I mean, we used to get that in the band as well. You'd improvise something. It'd be like the most amazing thing you've ever like put together, and like, right, okay, let's record it. And it's like we can't remember, or once it's gone, it's just lost to the air. Lost to the ether. It's really sad.
If it's recorded, it's not really necessary to repeat it on the stage, but like just find the basics and maybe. Do some reconstruction of chords and then maybe make a different.
Yeah, but that's it. That creates something new. There's always something new in performance. That's the joy of performance. I think that's the amazing thing about performance. It becomes this new spontaneity, which again is what Ruth Weiss was all about with jazz performance poetry, right? That's brought us back around to that. Okay, so I should. Well, exactly, completely anathema to her. Okay, well, I think I'm not going to play. I was going to plug so I've got a new album as well that came out recently. So I'm gonna briefly plug it, but I'm not going to play any songs from it. Oh, you want it? Okay, so I'll play one track. So this track is Lone Wolf. So it's kind of exploring what you were talking about with Michael Fisher, that ambience mixed with a kind of industrial noise sound. So this is Lone Wolf. Let's see if this will work. Yeah. This is so. I've been doing this coaxial project. I have a whole bunch of different projects, but coaxial has been more electronic experimentation. Again, using some idea to constrain what I'm doing. So I did an album of. I would sample a track and then I would mess with that sample and time stretch the sample so much that it's completely unrecognizable, but it's still some kind of soundscape to it. So that was one of the projects that I did with that. This new one, Neoism, is really a collection, maybe 10 years of different electronic experiments, and it's all. Every track I try to create a piece and then subvert it and then cut it up and then replace, and it's all kind of constantly recycling elements until I reach a point that I'm either happy with or that I'm happy to at least put on a tape, right? Or that that's enough. I can't do any more with this. Yeah. Well, this was the opposite of spontaneity with this one. That's why I've got the scissors. It's this constant recutting of pieces together. Okay, so this is Lone Wolf. I'll play a track from that. If I can get it to work. does that piece. So this, so I've had this relationship. There's a guy who runs a cassette tape. This is on cassette tape label up in Newcastle in the UK. He's put out hundreds of albums by different sort of noise and experimental artists over the years. So, and he's done an amazing job of keeping it going even during the COVID crisis at the moment. And he was good enough to put this new album out recently. So big shout to Steve and Cruel Nature Recordings. Okay, Thomas, I think it's probably time for us to draw this to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking about so many really fascinating stuff related to all these beat topics and noise and everything. So that is it for the podcast for this time. Look out for our EBSN email newsletter that Estibilitz is working on as we speak, and look out for new editions of the podcast soon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.